so that he'll have time, okay? No rush. Item 72, we have folks who are here on item 72. Why don't you come and present, and then let's bring up the card. And we had a member of the public who was here earlier. I don't know if he's still with us or was... Okay. Why don't we go ahead and get the staff report? This is item 72, colleagues.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Don Richa, Director with Parks and Recreation. Today's action was a precursor of the required noticing of the public hearing scheduled for December 18th. At that time, the county will consider acquiring the property from Post. The earlier comments of this morning from the seller refer to the purchase agreement between Post and the seller. I have colleagues from Post here, including President Walter Moore, who can speak to the purchase agreement between Post and the seller, and we are here to answer any questions.
So why don't we go to public comment? And I think this was an opportunity, sir, for you to speak.
I did submit a card, so it's Walter Moore, President of Post.
Right, Walter, and
yeah.
then, yeah, Walter.
Great. Walter Moore, President of Peninsula Open Space Trust for Post. The seller did place the property on the open market in the summer of 2017. Post is under contract with the seller to purchase the property. Our goal in purchasing the property is to maintain wildlife connectivity across the region as opposed to luxury home development. The property also provides a key link in a future trail corridor between the two existing county parks. Post is paying fair market value for the property, and our contract with the seller requires him to provide notice to the equestrian users of the sale. I'm here to answer any questions you have, but also hope you will authorize the clerk to set the hearing on December 18th to consider acquisition of the property. Thank you.
And then Brent Lee, if you'd like to come forward. Thank you.
And Mr. Lee, before you begin, just want to indicate, colleagues, you will recall Mr. Lee spoke earlier, and I'm going to consider that just a request for the item to be taken off consent and then allow this additional opportunity to comment. And that's a judgment of the chair. Mr. Lee, welcome. Please share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, my name is Brent, and I'm the owner of the property. Currently, it's called the Lakeview Stable. There are about over 60 horse owners. They board their horses on side the property. There's no notice sending out to the boarders, to the neighborhood. So the boarders do not have a chance to come here to speak up for themselves. So to me, since the first thing is sending out the notice, so the public involved, they be able to express their opinions. Without that, I'm the one who asking around, and luckily I got the timing for this meeting. This meeting, because it's on the daytime. Most of the boaters there are working, so they don't have chance to come here. Okay. So first of all, that property I own for over 20 years. It's always used for boarding the horses. So there is no intent or such things as luxury homes.
It is Mr. Lee, yes?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Mr. Lee, your time has expired, but with the consent of the board and without objection, I'm going to offer you an extra couple of minutes because I want to make sure that you get a chance to speak not only to the process issues that you just spoke to, but to the substance. So can we ask you to wrap up your comments in maybe just another 2 minutes? Is that possible, sir?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Without objection, we'll proceed in that way.
Anyways, the voters has been there for a long time, and then for most of them, horses is their only friend or a pet or something, their loved ones, so have them to vacate it and find another place is devastating for them because. There were other places being offered, but they inquire other places. They cannot find any opening, or the other places just not good enough compared to this one, or several other reasons. So they really devastating if they have been vacated out. And then also the fact is, Post is not the owner of the property. I'm still the owner. I have a contract with the Post, but the contract is running out. In 10 days, if they don't close the escrow, then there is no contract. And then I'm not going to extend it the purchase and the sale agreement. So, we could end up spending a lot of time going back and forth with the public notice, everything, and then there isn't anything that we can do. I mean, that the contract runs out, and then it's just not going to happen. So this is what I want to present. Hopefully, you see the in and out, and so we would, if we vote, we would vote it no. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's turn it back to staff, see if there's additional clarification from staff about the status of the acquisition process.
So again, the action today is to start that get the public noticing out prior to the public hearing, which will be on December 18th. The agreement we have members from Post here if you have questions regarding the agreement between Post and the seller and their purchase agreement.
All right. Colleagues, I'm going to ask the clerk to please display the voting panel on the screen. We do have recommended action. I'm going to go to Mr. Wasserman to see if he's got comments or questions, and then Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I do. It's not a simple decision. What happened here is an opportunity came via Post, then to the Parks Department, as several other properties in this county have transpired that similar way. This particular piece of property that Mr. Lee has that he's selling to Post, and he's correct, it's the county buying it from Post, is one that connects two county parks. It connects 11 miles of trails in which both pedestrians and horseback riders and other people can enjoy. The common denominator here, from my perspective, from what Mr. Lee just said, if it wasn't sold to Post, wasn't sold to the county, it would become single-family homes, McMansions, whatever you want to call them. I know that was Post's concern as well. That was Parks' concern as well. So everyone was concerned that that's what would happen here. This opportunity for open space and connecting existing trails would be lost. All three entities involved in this transaction agree on that. My staff and I went out to the site. We inspected, looked at the buildings, several of which were red tagged, which for those of you in the room don't know what that means they're uninhabitable at the time because of structural safety hazards. There were other buildings there that would certainly be questionable. I met with our Parks Department. I met with Post, and I said, hey, what about these people that own horses? Where can they go? And so we looked at an area around this particular property, looked at what they charged, looked at the opportunities they had to relocate these horses. We looked at that. We then looked at the cost of maintaining, this could not be maintained, it needed to be raised and then rebuilt, stables there, provide that as a service, as Mr. Lee referred to. And the guesstimate was a wide range, $5 to $18 million. But even at $5 to $10 million, a significant amount of money that would also take several years to do, in which case, again, the horses would be displaced. So at the end of the day, with all the input and information that I've received, and I talked to people who owned horses there, I talked to the two ladies that manage the property and the horse stable business there. I talked with Post. Glad to hear from Mr. Lee today. Talked with Parks Department. At the end of the day, I see what I call a greater good. And that greater good is the connection of two existing county parks, the trails, so we'll have 11 miles of continuous trails that will literally be enjoyed by tens of thousands of people a year. I'm sorry about the owners of the 72 horses that, assuming this transaction goes through, will need to relocate their horses. The information about this has been out for quite a while. It was over a month ago that we were out at the property. Again, I look at the greater good for the people of Santa Clara County. And the trails will be accessible by the owners of the horses. They'll be able to ride their horses on that, and tens of thousands of other people. It's the only downside to what otherwise is a wonderful opportunity to increase open space trails and parks in Santa Clara County. With that, I'll be making the motion to move it.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the recommended action as contained in agenda item 72. Is that correct, Supervisor?
Yes.
And we have a second from Supervisor Yeager. Additional comments or questions? Supervisor Chavez, anything additional? Supervisor Cortese.
Thank you, President. Just a question on the process here, procedure. As I'm listening to the comments and sort of studying this real time for about the third time, I hearken back to some comments. I had a hearing I attended many years ago, presided over by former San Jose Mayor Susan Hammer, where basically there was a little bit of a mess involved with a decision that was before the council, and she just stopped the proceeding and said, I would prefer that these kinds of issues be resolved before they come to the council. So why don't we continue the item and ask the parties to go work out what they need to work out, and then when you have something that's really prepared to move forward and there's agreement, then bring it back. I say that only because my question is, if I heard the testimony from one of the parties that the contract is would expire in 10 days, if we set this hearing, which involves issues that we are currently not a contractual party to, involving the equestrians, in the contract expires, are we going to be hearing, what happens? Just tell me what happens at that point. Do you ask us to take the hearing off the agenda? Do we cancel the hearing? What happens then? I'm asking this of the Parks Director. It's just a procedural question, or County Council, or anyone else who wants to answer it.
Well, I'd like to have President Walter Moore talk about the expiration of the agreement. It's the agreement between Post and the seller, so if he can comment on that, then I can respond.
Sure.
Without objection, come forward. Thank you.
There is no 10-day period. We have the right to exercise our right to acquire the property under the contract, and we plan to do so.
So you can close escrow anytime? There's no...
There is an open date right now until we get through the hearings, your hearings.
So what is the language? What is the language as to...
I'm happy to get it to
When
you,
you
share
would-
it with your council and stuff. I don't have it right in front of me. But there is no restricted period right now.
I'm not asking about a restricted period. I'm just asking, when is your close of escrow date as indicated in the contract? When do you have to close escrow by?
Hang on just a moment, Mr. Lee. Supervisor Cortese, this is your line of inquiry. If you would like to hear from Mr. Lee, I'm happy to call him forward. That's your call.
Anybody who just has the exact
All right.
language.
Sorry, just to be clear, there is no expiration date because our time runs 60 days after you approve the transaction. We have any time during that time to exercise our right to purchase the property.
And there's no limitation on when the Board of Supervisors has to exercise our action?
No.
Okay, so basically, the seller's in a position that they've, based on what you're saying, that they have issued an option
Right.
on the property in perpetuity?
It wouldn't be in perpetuity. It's within a reasonable time. That's a constraint under the law, but we're hoping this hearing is set for December 18th so that everybody can come forward and express their concerns, whether it's the equestrian communities or others.
We just ask County Council, is that your understanding of the contract that's under consideration? That it basically is open-ended and the speaker is saying for a reasonable time, although
I
what
don't
I'm
have a
hearing is that
copy
there's
of the
no date.
contract between Post and the seller, so
Yeah.
I can't opine on it.
Our contract will be between us and the county once you make your decision.
Okay, well, I'm going to vote no on the motion because it's really, really hard for me, and maybe it's just based on my background to indicate, affirmation to go forward with a real estate contract that I can't get clarity on even what the due dates are for closing the escrow or performance on the contract. I'm just asking basic questions about performance on the contract, and honestly, I'm not suggesting that you're testifying improperly. It just doesn't. It's still not clear for me, and I don't understand the open-ended situation and how that comports to real estate law. So,
Let me, go ahead.
I apologize for appearing vague. It's 60 days following your approval. We usually have a 30 to 60 days closing period. There's nothing ambiguous about it. We've done many of these contracts, and it's simply our expectation through the approval process, and then we will close within a short period after that.
All right, I'm going to say thank you to you for that clarification. I'm going to go back to Supervisor Cortese, see if he has anything else and/or, Mr. Cortese, I can see that Mr. Lee would very much like to share his point of view on this. Are you open to that?
yes, I am.
Mr. Lee, why don't you come forward one more time if you like? And if you want to share some language that you think helps clarify, I want to make sure everybody gets equal opportunity to share their point of view on this with our board.
Thanks for the opportunity. Let me read the contract. This is Section 5, close of escrow. The close of escrow shall occur on the date that is earlier of 60 days after buyer obtain county approval, as defined below, or such earlier date as buyer and seller may agree in writing. So, first, this contract, under this contract, Post supposed to get county approval on September 1st. That was the original approval on or before September 1st, 2018. They did not, of course. Then we agreed with a 30-day extension. That 30 days ends October 1st, 2018. That's long gone again. And so the best is from October 1st, 60 days after October 1st, which is December 1st, 2018, then that, if they are ready, bring the money, everything, I would honor that contract. In other words, we can close on December 1st, 2018, which is 10 days, in about 10 days. Okay. Otherwise, under this contract, there is no deal.
Thank you. Thank you again.
President Smitty, maybe it's unfair unless, again, we already posed the question to council and it didn't sound like they know at this moment the answer to the question, which of the parties is correct in terms of the expiration of the contract. And so obviously I can retract my question, Mr. Roach. I just thought maybe he knew that, and I don't want to ask a hypothetical question. The hypothetical question would have been, what then happens if Mr. Lee if the seller is correct and the contract expires? Would we just pull the hearing off the agenda? I'd assume that's what we would do, but I can proceed without that answer. I just want to say I'm supportive of acquiring the property. I find Supervisor Wasserman's persuasive argument more than persuasive, compelling, but I find it a little disturbing that there's elements of the contract that are in dispute real-time live here in our board chambers while we're trying to make what should have been a procedural, just a very simple procedural vote to set a hearing. And I don't want to be an arbiter of this dispute or any dispute relating to equestrians either, for that matter. So I'm just going to vote no as part of just one supervisor's signal that there needs to be a meeting of the minds between these parties before I can vote to set a public hearing.
Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. So two things that I just want to make sure I understand procedurally. So this item that we had on the agenda today, we did not notify the tenants of the current property to attend. Is that correct?
That's correct. The action today is to then do noticing for the public hearing, which will be coming up in December.
I understand the action. I'm really just asking whether or not we notified the tenants, and it sounds like we didn't.
No.
And the reason I'm saying that is that I think it's hard to ask the public to come to an up or down vote on the last day and think that they're going to get their day in court, so to speak. So that's partly why I was asking the question, and that may be a bigger process question we just want to consider in the future, especially where we know there's a level of interest from the tenants, or at least I'm assuming that's the case, unless that's actually not the case.
Yes. Thank you. So I was notified by post that they did notify the tenants, and it is on the Lakeview Stables website or Facebook
Today's
page
event.
for today's. So they notified the seller to notify the tenants.
Okay, well, that's really not the same thing. And
Right.
frankly, I appreciate you did that, but I'm really asking about our process, because now this is our process for discussion. But thank you for that feedback. And then the second question I just broadly want to ask, and this may be a question more for Post than our staff, but we would be purchasing the property with no conditions, meaning we're not going to have a stable. We're buying the land without the stable, potentially. That's what we're going to be doing at the hearing. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, that reinforces my point about having conversations with the neighbors that are out there already. Because even though this is not, the initial transaction isn't with us, it's still eventually with us. So I think that's important. I have to say that I've been concerned overall about strategy in which we're purchasing park property. I am really want to be respectful, frankly, to the amount of time that Supervisor Wasserman has spent on this already. My inclination actually was to vote no to set the public hearing, but I'm going to be voting yes to set the public hearing because of the work that's been done by Supervisor Wasserman. But the request I would make is I think the point that Supervisor Cortese raised about the details of the current transaction are actually very important to us, given the overlap of the transactions. I think if they were consecutive and not concurrent, that may have put us in a different situation. But the strategy we're using, I think, forces us to have a different kind of conversation with the current tenants and with the board in general prior to these items coming before the board. So thank you for that.
Supervisor Wasserman, I see your light is back on, sir.
Thank you. I want to say I appreciate all that's been said by the owner, by Post, the acquirer, by my fellow supervisors. Like I said, because there are residents there, it makes for a more difficult situation. I know in my years when I was with the town of Los Gatos, there were properties that were acquired for one reason or another. There were residents there, and that made it more difficult. In this particular instance, it's Post that's in contract with Mr. Lee. The county is not. To Supervisor Cortese's point that he mentioned, if for whatever reason that deal falls apart before December 18th, then our December 18th meeting is not happening. The purpose of today is simply to, well, it says adopt a resolution of the board and to authorize the clerk to set a December 18th day, which is the next step in the contract. I wish you had the contract with you here today. I wish you had legal opinion with you here today as far as interpretable one way or the other. But from my perspective, what this does is this gives, assuming there's 3 or more votes, this gives signal from Parks to Post that we are interested in, we want to acquire the property, should you acquire the property, for the purpose of making it additional parkland and connectivity of trails. I wish there was a way to, I wish the stables were in great shape. I wish the stables could stay. In my conversation with Post, they had another property where there were some stables. But the status quo, the current situation, the current condition of what's there is not inhabitable by man or beast. And there's no way that's going to get fixed before the sale goes through. Even if the county did it, it would be a decision before this board of $5 to $10 million and several years down the road to make happen. So in the interim, there is no easy solution at all for the existing 72 borders that are there in a place that has multiple red tags and a lot of buildings of a lot of concern to me and I know to Parks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Supervisor. And Supervisor Cortese, I see your light is still on, sir. Additional comments?
Yeah, I just want to know, again, I may very well support the acquisition if this motion passes when we get to that point, to the hearing. I support, again, for all the reasons earlier stated, the acquisition of the property. But I just want to note that under steps following approval in the ledge file, there's really no indication of the kind of notification that you were talking about, Supervisor Chavez. So I'm not an aye vote on the motion, so I don't want to be offering friendly amendments, but maybe it should be noted that
So I'm going to make a
some
friendly
notification
amendment
needs to happen. Okay.
to Supervisor Wasserman and Yeager that we make sure that there's outreach done by the county to the tenants and the impacted community. Thank you.
Supervisor Cortese, does that complete your comment?
Yes, and thank you.
Yeah, see the light's still on. Just one. I have a number of thoughts, a number of things I'd like to say, and I'm not going to. I'm going to lean forward and vote on the screen, ask my colleagues to do so, and we'll note that all votes have now been cast, and we'll ask the clerk to please display the results, and the motion carries 4-1. So the motion is carried 4-1. Supervisor Cortese voting no for the record. And gentlemen, before you step away, at the risk of stating what I hope is obvious by now, it would be helpful to have all of these legal issues clearly defined and articulated when we see you on the 18th of December, because by then we're going to need to know what we need to know. Okay? Thank you all. Thank you very much. And could we make sure as well that you talk to Mr. Lee before he leaves to make sure everybody's clear on what the process is from this point forward? Mr. Lee, thank you for being with us. I know it's been a long day, sir. Thank you. All right. That takes us to what I believe, Madam Clerk, is the last item on our agenda today, and that was item 60-A-I. This was initially a consent calendar item that was removed from consent at the request of our county assessor. Mr. Stone, please have a seat, and